Hey there, I'm back. It's been a little bit. My apologies. I've had stuff going on. It's Pat. Welcome back to Ground Zero Salem. I went to Vegas. That was one of the reasons why I've been away for a little while. Little family vacation to Sin City. It was cool. I'd never been before. Went and stayed at Circus Circus. I don't recommend that hotel to stay at. It's fun for the other stuff, though. From what I read on Reddit, because I was like, well, what's the deal with this place? It's a little dingy. What I read on Reddit about Circus Circus was it's the place where you go when you have a record, but you have kids, too. So, yeah, a little on the sleazy side. Of course, dirt cheap. Cool indoor amusement park, though, which was pretty rad, and a nice pool with, like, water slides and stuff. We went because my son turned 8, and he really wanted to go to Omega Mart. So we surprised him with tickets the day before his birthday, at his birthday party, to go to Vegas and go to Omega Mart. Omega Mart, if you're not aware of it, is a huge art installation done by this group called Meow Wolf. It's in this big, massive, kind of mall-sized structure called Area 15, which is obviously very, like, conspiracy, alien, sci-fi kind of themed place that has restaurants and stores and shops and stuff, but they also have Omega Mart, which is a fake supermarket with sci-fi themed products, most of which are real, that you can buy, like real soda, stuff like that. And some interesting, like, weird plush toys that are made to look like alien spray bottles, which is one thing that we got for our kid. And then when you go through a few secret doors, you go into this massive 3-floor structure that's roughly the size of a football field, I'm estimating, that has all these weird video screens and tunnels and just sci-fi crap everywhere. It's awesome. It's very cool. It's got its own sort of almost ARG style lore about it, where you can sleuth around and figure out how certain people went missing and all kinds of stuff like that. So if you nerd out over sci-fi and you haven't heard of this and you want to go to Vegas for whatever reason, that is definitely something to hit up. We also hit up the Punk Rock Museum, which was cool. Didn't get to go to one of those celebrity tour guide things, which most of the time it's not somebody I'm that interested in. This time, though, we were right between Steve Ignorant from Crass wrapping up his tenure there, and then Mitch Harris from Napalm Death, who's a Las Vegas local, also of Righteous Pigs and Goat Lord backup vocals. He was the tour guide the day we left, so I would have actually paid for that. He seems like a cool guy. That would have been interesting to meet him, but what are you gonna do? Cool place. You know, not massive, but a pretty decent size with, like, lots and lots of cool punk rock and hardcore ephemera going back to, you know, the proto-punk days of Iggy Pop and the Motor City stuff all the way up to the present. Lots of neat artifacts to check out if you're a nerd about the history of that particular genre of music. So now I'm back. I've had some other family stuff to deal with, and so it's not a fun thing to really mention, but just to get it out of the way. Not that I need to, but I'm an open book with most stuff. My father passed away almost an entire year ago, and the entire year, this is a big part of my original huge hiatus too, has been trying to sort through all of the legal stuff. He did not have any affairs in order whatsoever. No will. Nothing. So I've just been sorting out getting his house sold and what to do with his stuff and all that stuff, and with the help of a few very, very crucial family members, all that's been taken care of finally. So that was another thing that I was dealing with this past month, and in a few weeks I'll be going back to Syracuse for his celebration of life thing. We've decided to do it on the anniversary of his passing. So all that is done. That's what I've been busy with. Some fun stuff, some really not fun stuff. But I'm back to talk about metal, death metal specifically. I have a stack of CDs here. I've been kind of going through recent purchases, and instead of just doing, you know, CD or vinyl collection updates, taking recent stuff and maybe peppering it in with a few things from the backlog of the collection, and coming up with themes, coming up with my own interpretations of, like, history of it, and throwing in a little bit of knowledge, doing a little bit of research, but trying not to spit out, like, some sort of, like, I'm a Wikipedia article with long unkempt hair. I'm trying to put my own spin, my own perspective on things. For this, it's kind of a wide net. It's a little janky, but I think it's a topic worth discussing, and that's death metal up until this point. Death metal has really gone through a big renaissance lately, if you hadn't noticed. I mean, like it or hate it, all these bands from, I'd say the cusp of it was the blowing up of Blood Incantation and Horrendous, and then the wave of maggot stomp bands that got picked up by Century Media, all that stuff. It's gotten big. A lot of the younger, like, hardcore kid types are into it, that sort of stuff. There's a lot of divisive kind of bickering back and forth, the whole Glenn Benton thing that's happened recently. There's a lot of criticism, there's a lot of memeing. I think there's a lot of, like, good-natured kind of joking around, too. People need to not take stuff so seriously. But the thing is, this stuff never went away. It didn't exist from the 90s and then disappear and then come back, when Blood Incantation came into being. I'm glad that it's witnessed a renaissance, because I really like the genre. I've loved it since I was 13 years old. But I got back into it after the 90s really deeply again, probably around 2007, 2008, when I was at the end of my 20s. I was getting a little bit burnt out on hardcore music, which was what I was actively involved in as far as like playing in bands, booking shows, that kind of stuff. I was about to go back to school for, a real ass career, and I don't know, I had just kind of burnt out on bands from the United States, primarily kind of sounding like they were from the early 80s, although it is one of my favorite sounds of hardcore. And I witnessed a great resurgence in, fast hardcore, which was something I was missing out on in the 90s when I first started going to shows and everything. But things felt like they were getting a little bit repetitive and a little bit of like an exhaustive trying genre study, which is kind of funny because if you look at kind of where death metal has gone recently, it's history repeats, at least for me. Different genres, but still. So I was burnt out on it, and I was always into the earache stuff. That was something I never put down, really. Napalm Death, Bolt Thrower, all that kind of stuff. Some of the early RC, Roadrunner stuff as well, of course. All the greats, Obituary, Sepultura, nothing that you probably wouldn't have heard of. There were a few obscure bands like Deteriorate, I was always a big fanboy of, and a few others here and there, Blood Ritual and some other stuff that I kind of held on to from my tape trading days. But I didn't really know or wasn't paying attention to the underground metal scene. There was stuff that kind of crossed over a little bit, like the newer bands at the time that would play with metallic hardcore bands that were kind of grindy, like Circle of Dead Children and Commit Suicide and Harry Carey and stuff like that. Some of the Willow Tip stuff was crossing over. But I was really taken aback when I kind of just came across the Nuclear War Now board and was looking through Hell's Headbangers and started to kind of discover the first couple releases by Dark Descent, the first couple of releases by Detest Records, who are defunct, and mostly put out tapes. They were from Belgium, but it was the start of a lot of the worship of the really lo-fi, grimy sort of sweet death stuff, some Finnish stuff too. A lot of bands like Swallowed got their start on Detest Records. Lots of cool smaller tape labels at the time, Skeleton Plague and everything. So I have a kind of a nostalgia towards late 2000s, early 2000 teens death metal, because I really went all in and started buying diehards and all that kind of stuff. The beginning of, the Crypt Dark Symphonies had been around for quite a while before that, but they started doing quality vinyl reissues, and I jumped on a bunch of those. The Crypt of Kerberos reissue, for example. Just discovering all this grimy, gross, relatively raw compared to the brutal technical death metal of that day stuff. I was all about it. I was all about the unearthing the bands I hadn't discovered. I was all about discovering new bands that were honoring that sound. So, and it never really left me because I'm always flipping through Discogs, looking through different people's stores and stuff, kind of checking off boxes of stuff that I haven't heard yet that I wanted to hear, stuff that sounds interesting. So I buy a lot of stuff from that past 20 years before death metal blew up again, and I have a stack of it in front of me, of mostly of stuff that I've purchased within the past 6 months to a year. It's kind of doing it a disservice or being a little dishonest by saying it's a collection update, because this isn't like the past couple of weeks. I am curbing or trying to curb my buying habits with CDs simply for no other reason than I'm just running out of room. And I'm tired of filing stuff. And I don't know how much more stuff I really, really need at this point. We'll see how that goes. But I want to go through, this is the 2000s and 2010s stack. Then there's a stack of grind behind me, and then a stack of punk and hardcore CDs. And then I'm going to file it all and then just chill. Because I found a new obsession, which is video games. Maybe I'll get into that at some other point. But I've been buying up PS2 and PS3 games. Maybe I'll talk about that. If anybody's interested in me discussing video games, put it in the description below. Maybe I'll start a separate channel for it. Who knows? I've been really, really going deep on the stuff lately, though, which has been a distraction. But I'm back here to talk about this. So, what do I talk about first? None of these are really in any kind of order. I grouped a bunch of these up that are part of the same scene, but beyond that, and you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute, but beyond that, nothing really time-wise or whatever. Most of these I've kind of committed to memory of around when it came out. I've taken a few notes. I'm sure I'll miss, as I tend to do. If I don't happen to mention the correct year or whatever, there's going to be little captions like I've done in videos past. But anyway, to get into it, a good example of what I mean, like I don't really hear too much stuff that sounds like this nowadays. This is a Swedish band. This isn't even from that long ago. This is Degial, Savage Mutiny. And I will try to be better with my glare game. I just got a new ring light. Worship the sun. So I think that helps make things look a little bit better, but I also have to be tricky about this. So Savage Mutiny, gnarly. I'd say it's very, very in between black and death metal, and obviously you can take that a couple of different ways. Not bestial, of course, the black and death Rossbay cult kind of stuff. It's not like that, and it's not like Trenchant either, who I talked about not too recently, who had kind of a bolt thrower Asphyx-esque, really hard to say, kind of tank treads crushing skulls meets black metal kind of thing. This is more straight between the more pummeling, manic, faster kind of moments that Entombed and Dismember and all those bands have, with the raw elements of Scandinavian black metal. It's kind of screechy. It's not super raw the way a lot of that necro black metal stuff is, though. The production leans more towards like a Stockholm kind of death metal approach, but it's very, very good. It's very evil, very, very, very scathingly evil, very cool. Swedish band. I didn't mention that already. I think I did. Trance of Death by Venenum. German band. This is very cool. This goes in a lot of different directions. It gets almost proggy at certain points, but it's filled with meaty riffs. It's got a very like occult atmosphere to it. Acoustic moments here and there. It's weird. I don't like stuff like this as a rule. I get a little bit annoyed when bands try to be a little too expansive and nasal gavy and fart smelling. A little editor's bay note here. It's pretty funny. I just noticed pretty good gaffe there. I just said nasal gavy. Meant to say navel gazy, which is also not really a real term, but makes more sense than nasal gavy. Not quite as good as Triarchy of Lost Luggage or Youth is Wasted on the Weak, but still a pretty fun gaff. That was pretty good. Getting real Biden up in here. But if it's done right and it comes from a real place, it rules. It also doesn't hurt that this is a labyrinth of like really crushing riffs that are very memorable, very, very cool, great like deep growl vocals, not like super guttural or anything like that, but monstrous enough, discernible to a certain extent. And then you've got Savage Deity, Beyond the Sanctum. This band's from Southeast Asia. This came out in, I want to say 2017, yeah, 2017 on Slaughterhouse Records. This is great. This is very Floridian, very like brutal thrash kind of riffs with death metal vocals, really pounding primal drums. They use the same drum beat a lot, which is like a staggered, like almost kind of blast. It's weird, but it's really, really good. Catchy, very like, as far as the production goes, very like loud in the mix. It feels almost brick-walled, like overwhelming mastering, but not cheap sounding. You know what I mean? It's just very, very forceful. It's great stuff. No More Room in Hell. This is a British band, if I'm remembering correct, and this was released on Severed Records and Morbid Generation. This is technically an EP. It's like 7 songs, and it almost falls into like the brutal with 2 O's trap. There's a few moments that kind of feel like it's kind of going in that direction, not in a bad way, like maybe like towards like a Malignancy kind of thing or something, but it manages to stay in like the first 3 Cannibal Corpse records kind of vibe. It's very like almost slamming, but more like slamming your head in a car door, not like slamming moshing kind of approach. Yeah, lots of horror movie samples and stuff like that. Then you've got Embalmed, Brutal Delivery of Vengeance. Texas band that had been around for a really long time. They might have broken up at a certain point and had a hiatus and then come back. They were a really early example of brutal DM, like with demos from the mid-90s, I want to say. And they were gone for a bit. This came out in 2013, so they'd been away from at least recording anything for quite some time. And it's awesome. They pretty much picked up right where they left off. I mean, a bit more modern production. Nothing too obnoxious, though. Like, it's still got a raw edge to it. Very bludgeoning, heavy death metal stuff. If you're into, I'd say, like, earlier Deeds of Flesh and that sort of thing. Like, it's along those lines. If you like Suffocation, but like Human Waste era Suffocation, like, it's primal enough where people like me who don't want to hear technical wizardry most of the time wouldn't get bored with it. It's just like bludgeoning, nasty stuff. From Tejas, Ululate. I think that's how that's pronounced. This is a Chinese band. Back to the Cannibal World. Came out in Extreme Music. Again, this was a 2010s one. I want to say 2017 or something like that. Very, very good. This is, again, something about like cultural vacuums and stuff like that. I don't know what the death metal scene is like in China. And I've never heard any other Chinese bands, I don't think. This is very, very cool. It has a certain complexity to it that isn't too overdone. I don't even know really what to compare it of. I feel like a lot of different styles of 90s death metal are represented in here, and it does have lots of twists and turns, but it doesn't feel like they're trying to do the incantation thing or anything like that. It's too like violent and fast, and also not overly complicated. I mean, it does touch tips with like an Autopsy kind of thing here and there, but it's not as punkish, you know? It's really its own thing. Great monstrous vocals on this one too. Very fucking cool. We got Created to Kill, Death's Construction. This is completely rip your head off fast, like death grind kind of stuff, with a lot of early death metal era Napalm Death, Harmony Corruption, Utopia Banished specifically, that kind of stuff mixed with like Cannibal Corpse. It's super nasty, super fast too. Really, really quick. Great stuff. Suicide. This is Unspeakable Acts and Dark Descent release. This band, if I'm remembering right, I think Simon over at Explosive Action told me these guys were Aussies, if I'm remembering right, and they're great. It's also a little bit on the kind of punkish sort of side, at least with like the 1-2-1-2 kind of drum beat stuff going on with it. But it also almost leans into sort of a Morbid Angel kind of thing at certain points. Very primal, but also like technically adept. Nasty, nasty death metal stuff. This is an interesting one. This band's a band that I've been aware of since my teens, that I read reviews of. I had a couple of zines from Rochester and Buffalo growing up in Syracuse, and I always heard about this band, Withered Earth. And they'd been around. They had another name, which I'm trying to remember. Oh, Disgorged was their previous band. Not Disgorge, not one of those, but Disgorged. And they were very much in the vein of all that stuff that was coming out of like the Buffalo and maybe Southern Ontario area, that kind of bludgeoning, brutal death metal stuff, Cannibal Corpse, of course, Eternal Suffering, Baphomet, all that kind of thing. They were a little even more brutal than that, though. I feel like they were going more towards a really early Suffocation or even Mortician thing, like early on. Very swampy. Cenotaph from Turkey is another comparison, if you're familiar with them. Just really heavy, early, brutal DM stuff. And then they turned into Withered Earth. The members went on to form Withered Earth, rather. And to the point where they share a discography CD, so it was incestuous enough. Maybe the exact same members, I don't know. Didn't research that far. Withered Earth is a different animal entirely. There's a lot of that brutality on there, but there's a lot of very well thought out composition. It's weird because some of the rhythms feel almost kind of hardcore-ish, and I mean metallic, beat down kind of hardcore, not negative approach. But they kind of feel like they have that 90s jump up kind of thing a little bit, but it's in this context where it doesn't feel like that, and it's really hard to explain, other than like Cataclysm post Sylvian Hood leaving. Like it's almost like that, but like I really don't like that stuff. I don't think it's very good. This almost does that right. It's hard to explain. You'd have to listen to it, and I'll put a link below. But it's very accomplished, kind of almost epic, complex death metal stuff with just a certain kind of bounce to it. I don't know. I really like it though. Withered Earth from Rochester, and then we've got some Pacific Northwest stuff. I was always aware of all this stuff going back to when it initially started happening. I don't know why I didn't really jump on it originally. I remember hearing about Ghoul when they came out, and Frightmare. But for one reason or another, I didn't really jump on this stuff until past 10 years or so. So I have a Frightmare here. I've got Midnight Murder Mania by Frightmare. I've got Blood Freak. This is I think the latest Blood Freak. It's from only like 2017. So Total Destruction of the Human Form. I've got the Splatterhouse discography, which is everything they did between 2004 and 2007, I believe. The Diseased and Deranged discography. And then a very not safe for work Lord Gore 2-on-1 2 CD thing, which I'm only going to show the back of here. The Autophagus Orgy and Resickened. The front is a bunch of gory stuff going on with naked anime girls and gas masks and God knows what. What is it with anime? What is it with anime? Are all of you okay? Like, what? I watch way too much drama YouTube, and there's some weird stuff going on these days with anime.
See, this is an example of the kind of structure that I'm referring to.
The other one is like a with two chicks and a guy, and in retrospect, looking at it, knowing now that that artist is a lolicon, yeah, I can see it. When I looked at it, I think the vibe that I got was like short stack, thick kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like the way like goblins get drawn. But you know how they're all like thick short stacks, right? That was the vibe that I got, because in the image, the girl that's shown has super thick legs.
I never want to watch anime again. I don't want anything to do with anime. I got my waist bin here, and I got some of my anime. We got Death Note, one of my favorites. Fuck it, throw it in the bin. We got some Dragon Ball Z, another great anime show. Throw it in the fucking bin. Robotech seems pretty harmless, but who knows? Maybe there's some lolly in there. Throw it in the fucking bin. Ys, based on one of my favorite RPG franchises, in the fucking bin. Hell, I've got video games that are anime inspired. Those go in the bin too. Ys, the video game, gone. The Final Fantasy games, there's probably some lolly in there somewhere.
And I'm not like a normal, well-adjusted person either. Like, what is it? Anyway, I don't know. I loved Vampire Hunter D and Akira as a kid. It was also innocent. Anyways, so I feel like all these bands, and then there's some bands that, you know, I don't have anything in front of me by, but I do like a lot, like Hemorrhage and Impaled, you know, all that stuff, all that early 2000s kind of horror grind, gore grind, death metal, heavy carcass worship style stuff. I've been on a little bit of a tear with it recently. I enjoy it quite a bit. I mean, all the common threads between all these bands, I think, is kind of a campiness, love for horror movies, a love for the first two Carcass records. What else? a thrash metal influence with certain bands, although I feel that was most prevalent with Engorged, who aren't in this pile. Although I've loved them longer than any of these other bands. I think they were the one band I was into from this whole little scene that kind of stretches from like Oakland up to all the way up to Canada. I think most of these bands are from Portland, but I should have researched more about it. They do share a bunch of members as well. One of which was billed on a bunch of things as Colin Powell, which I always thought was very, very of the time and very funny. But anyways, they all have their strengths, you know, and maybe some weaknesses here and there. Frightmare, I'd say, is the most accomplished and the most varied in terms of weaving in the Goregrind thing, but also a little bit of traditional heavy metal, some thrash. There's a lot of mood to it. I do like this a lot. I might like this more than early Ghoul, to be honest. And then Blood Freak. Blood Freak, I'd say, is the most brutal, the most bludgeoning, having some of those elements, but also having a lot to do with early Cannibal Corpse, I'd say. And that kind of thing. At least on this record. This is one of the later things they've done. So maybe their earlier albums are a bit different. I do have another one of their earlier records on tape somewhere from Headsplit, I think. Splatterhouse is definitely just kind of middle of the line. Probably the one that was left the least amount of an impression on me, but still totally enjoyable. I'd say like probably pretty similar to Frightmare, but a little less like varied all over the map. And then Lord Gore is definitely the sickest, you know, the most almost leaning into like kind of like a porn grind or really, really guttural, kind of not quite toilet flushing or chirpy kind of guttural vocal, but getting kind of close to it. And also pretty strong variation in tempo. Some parts that are almost kind of slower, they're almost kind of sludgy, almost stonery, sludgy kind of breaks here and there. This is something, another not safe for work deal. Death Curse. And I did not look where these guys were from, because I just got this not too long ago from an order from Billy Nocera from Evil Speak Productions. I buy up his books like they're my job. At some point I do want to do a well-edited, kind of in-depth look at a bunch of the stuff that he's done, as well as some other books that I have, but that's a project that's going to take time, so we'll see when I actually get that going. But he's always cool and always throws in some extras, usually CDs. He threw in this Death Curse. This is like a passion project with two guys. And it's very assassin and murder with all R's. Murder. And it's, again, very thematically familiar to everything that I just talked about, but way more stripped down. Way more of like a traditional heavy metal, 1 foot up on the vocal PA, kind of, you know, almost cock rocking out kind of guitar riffs on it and everything. I'd say reaching maybe towards like a Midnight kind of vibe with the slower parts, but very steeped in horror and atmosphere and slasher stuff, obviously. Pretty cool. They kind of have some curveballs musically on there too that aren't like straight up just like that either, which is pretty cool. It's a nice little listen there. Then I need to wet my whistle. I haven't done this in a while, so. Alright. Then you've got Haemophagus, which is a band from Italy. Also put stuff out on Razorback, like this one, Atrocious, which came out in 2013, I want to say. And then Stream of Shadows. This is a Self-Made God release from 2017, I want to say. They have a lot of sound-wise similarities with everything I just talked about. This kind of horror-themed, early grind, early death metal, still atmospheric kind of sound, although I want to say Haemophagus has a few more tricks up their sleeve in terms of kind of reminding me of the first Possessed record, Seven Churches, having this sort of late 80s like thrashy death metal thing going on. Autopsy would be a strong comparison too, but also feeling kind of thrash, mixing up kind of a raspy sort of vocal with like a gore grind or deeper growl too. Lots of catchy riffs all over it. Real spicy, enjoyable kind of stuff. And then Maim from the Womb to the Tomb. This is a Swedish band. This came out on Soul Cellar sometime in the 2000 teens. It's interesting to hear a Swedish band kind of go back to an Impetigo and Autopsy sort of thing, because those two bands were so big of an influence. Repulsion too, of course. All those bands were such a massive influence on the Swedish scene. Bands like Entombed, Dismember, Unleashed, all that kind of stuff. It's almost like the Swedish bands kind of paying it forward and going back and doing an homage to the American bands, but retaining their Swedishness. There's a lot of kind of heavy, dropout, slower, eerie parts on this. There's some heavy kind of autopsy stuff going on. It's very good. Never really heard of these guys when this was out. I mean, it was out over 10 years ago, I think, or around that time. But it's certainly worthwhile. There's a ton of HM2 stuff. The thing with the HM2 and Swedish stuff is that it can get really boring. There's a lot of stuff that came out on Pulverized last year that I really wanted to like, and I enjoyed. Pleasant listen, not going to name any names, but it just kind of like washed over me. And I feel like there's just got to be something a little bit more there than just sounding like the big three of Swedish death metal. And Maim managed to throw a little twist in there, which is going back to the roots of their sound. And then we've got Winterwolf from Finland, Lycanthropic Metal of Death. It's a mouthful. I was unsure for a moment if that was actually the album title, or if it was like, Relapse used to have music to mangle your mind on the spine, like it was proclaiming what it was, and it was called something else. But yes, Lycanthropic Metal of Death, Spart Records, again, sometime in the mid-2000 teens. Very, very awesome Finnish death metal stuff that also feels kind of Swedish too. And I know that's like nerd shit, like splitting hairs. Like what is the difference? A lot of people, a layperson may ask, especially because, a lot of it involves like a certain guitar tone and whatnot. Because I think a lot of the Finnish stuff has almost as ugly of a guitar tone as the Swedish stuff. They obviously didn't all copy using the same pedal or anything like that, but I feel like there's a lot of Finnish stuff that has almost the same kind of thing going on. I think the big difference is overall in Finnish death metal, there's probably a little bit more doom. There's a little bit more heavy, slow stuff going on, depending on what band you're listening to. Also, like bands like Demigod sound, to my ears, like almost something a little bit more American, although retaining their own national identity. With that all kept in mind, there's certain elements of this that feel pretty Swedish, something bordering on something resembling melodicism here and there. There are slower parts that feel pretty Finnish. There's almost some parts that approach like maybe a little bit of a death and roll thing, but I don't think enough to scare anyone away. But it's very quality, accomplished death metal stuff. I don't think these guys did too much. I think they did a split with Disma, and that might be it, but certainly worth checking out. And I know that they have a pretty big lineage of like other bands they came from. I'll have to look it up, but they went by a different name up to a certain point and changed it. It's escaping me right now. Then we've got a band actually from Sweden. This is Bombs of Hades. This is the Serpent's Redemption. Part of that big resurgence of bands doing the Swedeath thing from the mid 2000s up to the early 2010s or so. I feel like the first wave of like death metal revivalism was that. It was like the Swedish sound, and then it was an incantation, and then it went more towards Autopsy, I think, after that. But it's funny because it has always been there. Like the band's doing Carcass in the end of the 90s, But Bombs of Hades definitely were a band that deserved to be able to do that and did it well. Several of the members were from classic Swedish band Abhoth, who were a 90s band who were great. I think one of the first Dark Descent releases was Abhoth's like discography, if I'm remembering right. Abhoth were a great, dark, grimy Swedish death metal band. Probably more similar in sound to something like Grave than something like Entombed, or early Carnage even, really primal kind of stuff. Bombs of Hades are definitely going more towards like an HM2 left-hand path meets like some D-beat, meets a little bit of doom here and there. There's like a longer, I think like 7-minute song on this. This isn't my favorite thing by them. I have a compilation of all their splits and singles and stuff. That's really, really good. But they're a pretty accomplished band that like nobody really talks about anymore. I don't hear a lot of people discussing Bombs of Hades, but they're awesome. Like these guys and Bastard Priest are probably two of my favorite sort of like little bit of like, let's not forget that we came from the same country as Anti-Cymex, but also Entombed. There's a little bit of more punk in there taken, there's a big punk formula as part of Entombed as well. You know, those sort of like 1-2-1-2 beats that I was talking about, kind of thrash beats as opposed to like technical blasting and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like these guys in Bastard Priest and probably a few more that I'm forgetting. Miasmal probably was another good one that kind of cranked the hardcore punk like back into it a little bit more. And I like that. I like that stuff. Funebrarum. Band from New Jersey. The Sleep of Morbid Dreams. So this is a cool band. This is Daryl Khan of many, many, many bands. Citizen's Arrest, Abbas Goroth, Disma, plenty of others. Longtime hardcore and metal journeyman. State of Fear. No, not State of Fear. Taste of Fear, sorry. Taste of Fear. Guy's been around forever, done a lot of great projects. I think this was the thing he did right before Disma, if I'm remembering right. Obvious nod to classic Finnish death metal there. Funebrarum. Great stuff, but I feel like there is like its own stamp on it too. It's not a total genre study. It's not a total worship. It's not ripping off Funebra. There's other Finnish influences there, as well as just a lot of old ancient death metal stuff and a certain very like accomplished American drumming style that's like very tight blasting, and it's produced really well and it sounds good. Like I'm normally like a modern drum sound kind of thing, but it sounds perfect the way it works with the music. It adds something to it with all the kind of cacophonous, cavernous sort of stuff going on with it. It's really, really good. Dark death metal stuff. Deformity. So this is another like one of the reasons I do this channel, discover new stuff recommended to me by viewers. Superior. This is one of those 8,000 bands, one of those Belgian bands. I think they probably played with Congress and all those bands. Deformity completely crossed over into death metal, more or less. Their first EP it sounded like very death metal influenced metalcore or halfway in between, no matter how you slice it. Very good stuff, if you like that sort of thing. I do, not for everybody. This, however, you could hand this to a full-on death metal person that does not like anything resembling hardcore, and they would just think it's like probably a pretty bitchin' death metal record. They completely went over. This came out on Displeased Records way back in 2002. At moments, it kind of reminds me of Vital Remains and Deicide, the sort of fast, like blazing, borderline technical, satanic death metal kind of stuff. But they also incorporate little breaks that you can tell they came from hardcore, but there's nothing really very metalcore about it. And there's even a few moments where they go full-on traditional heavy metal. I'm trying to remember which one. The song Raven has like clean vocals in it and sounds like a straight-up trad metal song, with maybe a little bit on the thrash side, but out of nowhere, and it completely feels cohesive and fits. It's really cool. Great production too, just blistering death metal by former hardcore kids. And then Butcher ABC, North of Hell. This Japanese band. I saved the best for last. This is a fantastic record. This is so good. And it seems to just pay homage to tons of great stuff. A lot of that great stuff that I mentioned that I grew up with, including Brutal Truth and Bolt Thrower, and a lot of earache stuff, a lot of grind stuff, but it doesn't sound like any particular band. The riffs on it are fantastic. It's super grimy, very, very, very gristly, bottom heavy, almost like a stenchcore or grindcore kind of guitar tone, but with more of an emphasis on like death metal song structures. Great growled, guttural vocals, almost kind of indecipherable in a good way. Yeah, this is definitely where it's at. This band's great. I've heard other people mention them here and there, a few other YouTubers, Eric Bauer and stuff, and I think I had a split with them in, I want to say Necrofilth or something like that. But I hadn't heard much, and this was, it was $5 on Discogs, and it's probably my favorite thing out of the pile, so there you go. Okay. I timed that perfectly. I gotta go pick up my kid. So I'll see y'all later. Have a good week, and I'll be back on the map in just a minute with punk and grind and whatever else.